and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
And I'm Chris Cooper, sitting in for Ann Northrup.
Delighted to have you.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Andy.
Delighted to have you back. We start off by noting for our free speech viewers that next week they're going to be in pledge mode, and this show will premiere on Fridays at 9 p.m. and repeat on Saturdays at 8:30 p.m. and Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. until the beginning of October. These are all Eastern times. Check your local listings. In the headlines,
well, Mr. Trump is still running his shenanigans. He has decided to get rid of DACA in about 6 months, number one. And number two, he's nominated someone who is opposed to civil rights to head the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. More foxes guarding the henhouse.
You took the words right out of my mouth. It may seem ridiculously early, but the contest for the Democratic nomination for president in 2020 is already in full swing. And if we have time towards the end of the show, we've been talking about this with each other. We'll evaluate the hopefuls and say where we are.
Some lesbians in West Virginia win a settlement against a county clerk who, when she gave them their marriage license, called them abominations and screamed in their face.
And there was a break for transgender people in Indiana.
Meanwhile, Richard Simmons' lawsuit for defamation has been dismissed, and in a roundabout way, that may turn out to be a win for trans people.
The poet John Ashbery has died at the age of 90.
And in Jamaica, a leading gay activist, Dexter Pottinger, was brutally murdered, and we'll tell you about that.
Israel's High Court has rejected the right to same-sex marriage.
And a controversial self-help guru who I know nothing about, so Andy will have to bring me up to speed, named Louise Hay, who drew many people to AIDS with her sessions in the 1980s, has died.
Very controversial. In fact, our associate producer, Bill Bowman, calls her a murderer for what she did to people with AIDS, but we'll discuss that when we get to that. I'll start off with a little bit of good news. The NBC Wall Street Journal poll came out just as we were coming over here, and it's mainly about, do you accept all the social change that's going on in America? And 55% of people say they're comfortable with that, and 24% say that they're not. But 60% say that they support same-sex marriage.
Do we believe them?
Which is up from 53% in 2013. And, this is very important because we got to keep building that number, because if Trump gets another nominee on the court, and Anthony Kennedy is set to retire at the end of the next term.
Well, there's rumors. Let's not bring the worst case down on our heads so quickly.
He's told his clerks. I suppose he could change his mind, but that's what he's telling his clerks, according to insiders, that he's stepping down, and then Trump or Pence or Ryan or whoever's president gets to appoint somebody else, unless we get. It's very complicated. Anyway, I'm just saying, let's keep getting that number up there. And you know what that means? That means to me, we have to talk to our neighbors and keep moving things along and not just say, oh, we won. No, we gotta build on that victory.
Well, it's an extension of the lesson we hopefully learned from this past election, which is that we can't rely on top-down protections. We've got to build things up from the ground.
Yes.
We've got to get people in local office who are good on our issues. We've got to get local support on our issues and just keep building up rather than relying on a president we love to, bring these gifts to us.
Most of you out there live in states where you have lost the state legislature to the conservatives. And that includes New York in terms of the state Senate. Even though we will elect a majority of Democrats here, the Republicans control our state Senate. You've been on this case for a long time in New York. But that's what we have to do. We have to take back our local governments and our state governments, and then we'll have more of a... Now, the president isn't relying totally on lobbying. He's relying on prayer. Look at this picture from the photo op at the White House this past week with Trump in the White House. And this is all about Hurricane Harvey, and they all got together, right? But the guy in the red tie to the left of the president in the picture, that is Robert Jeffress. He is the same pastor who said Satan is behind homosexuality, Islam, Mormonism, and Roman Catholicism. I mean, this is how bad it is in that White House. I mean, that is Trump's base.
Are you surprised? You're speechless.
I am absolutely speechless.
Well, meanwhile, coming out of this White House is the promised repeal of DACA. DACA standing for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Now, you've been hearing about this in the mainstream press all the time, so we don't need to belabor it. But there is supposedly a 6-month phase-in, during which time he sort of punted and said, "Oh, well, Congress will have to do something about this in the next 6 months if they want it to stick around." And then today, or last night, he tweeted, and you know we all have only his tweets to go by. He tweeted, "Oh, but if in 6 months I haven't done anything, maybe I'll revisit this." So who knows what he's thinking and what he's actually going to do.
Now, Chris, are you being entirely fair to the president? He said he loves these people. And he sent out his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, to condemn them. And of course, he pardoned Joe Arpaio, who is a total racist, anti-immigrant dog. But the gay groups are on this because a lot of these dreamers are gay, not just because a certain percentage of them are, but you know, if you grew up from a foreign, you're from a foreign nation where we're a lot less accepted, and you're here and you've spent your entire life here, and you've been able to come out and enjoy, you know, if you have to go back, forget about it.
Well, one of the things that came up was, for example, if you're here illegally from El Salvador and you were brought here, you know, by your parents, it's not like you did it, but you were raised here, and they send you back there. You know, the murder rate in El Salvador for transgendered people has soared.
Oh, Honduras also, of course.
So you know, it's a real
and a lot
danger.
of other places.
But you know, quite apart from that, you don't have to pinpoint the individual gay people for the reason that this is not a good thing to do. You just need your common sense and a sense of human decency and a sense of fair play.
Now again, Republican and Democratic administrations didn't do anything about this in Congress for decades, right? Which they should have. But there is this positive Trump effect that I've been noting, and that is that Republicans who would not otherwise come out for these things are coming out on this DACA thing and saying this shouldn't happen, whether it's Paul Ryan or Orrin Hatch, Dean Heller, Dan Donovan from Staten Island.
John McCain.
You know, they are speaking out, whereas if Obama was president, they'd be criticizing him.
Right, exactly.
You know? All right. Now, we mentioned that the president was in the White House there praying after the Hurricane Harvey. And we also mentioned on the show that there is a gay effort to help people who are impacted from the Montrose Center, which is the LGBT center there. Ruby Rose, an actress who was on Orange is the New Black, donated $10,000 to this campaign to help the survivors of Harvey. And she got blasted on social media. What, do you only care about gay people? Well, no, but I mean, if we don't care about our own people, who is going to care about them? And a lot of the other funds are not going to get to, help our centers, which are serving tens of thousands of people in many cases. So she is doing that.
Well, hats off to Ruby Rose.
Ruby Rose. And you can, if you want to learn more about this effort at the Montrose Center, we'll put it in our email. You can sign up for our email by going to our website. That's www.gayusatv.org, and you can sign up for a weekly email. You'll get program announcements, etc.
Meanwhile, back in the White House, Mr. Trump has been incredibly ineffectual in advancing a lot of his agenda, but the one thing he's been dangerously effective in is in, as we termed it at the beginning of the show, putting the foxes in charge of the hen house, basically gutting regulations and gutting agencies that are supposed to uphold these regulations, principally by putting people in charge of them who have worked their entire lives to undermine these agencies and undermine these causes. And the latest example is this guy named Eric Dryband, who's been nominated to head the Civil Rights Division, what's been termed the crown jewel of the Justice Department, which is about enforcing civil rights laws, anti-discrimination laws, and now they're putting a guy in charge of it, Eric Dryband, who spent his entire life helping corporations fight against anti-discrimination laws.
His hearing was today. We don't know how that came out, so we'll report on that next week. But, you know, he opposed legislation that would prevent age discrimination in workplaces. He filed an amicus brief supporting an employer accused by the EEOC of discriminating against Black and Latinx applicants. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. Women, and LGBT people, older workers.
Specifically LGBT, he was defending the University of North Carolina when North Carolina had their heinous, I'll call it a bathroom bill because that's how it came to be known, but it did much more than that. But specifically, the University of North Carolina was charged with enforcing those bathroom bill provisions, and he defended them while they were doing that.
Yes. Eric Dryband, bad person.
The latest in a string of bad people.
And in the midst of Hurricane Harvey, Trump nominates to be the head of NASA, the Space Administration, a politician from Oklahoma named Jim Bridenstine, he's a climate change denier. Now, NASA is where we get a lot of our scientific information for the EPA, which is a useless agency at this point. So that, you know, I mean, it's just, you want to just have these things keep happening, these catastrophes. You know, keep it up. That's what they're doing. Even Marco Rubio spoke out against this guy. He says he thinks it would be devastating for the space program to have someone like this running it. Marco Rubio. All right, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zayed Ra'ad al-Hussein, condemned Trump's attacks on Muslims, minorities, and transgender people, calling them grossly irresponsible. It emboldens those who think similarly to sharpen their assaults on these communities. Like Donald Trump is going to listen to the United Nations, and he apparently is already in the process of defunding U.S. efforts at the UN as it is. So.
Well, maybe Nikki Haley, our UN representative, can talk him out of it.
Yes, she was very upset when she was attacked on Pride Day. She was down in the village and she was having brunch, and some people saw her, recognized her, and condemned her for associating with that administration, and she thought that was out of order. You're out of order. Your whole administration's out of order. As with the trans ban, now we talked a lot about that last week, the trans military ban, more groups are suing.
It's a total of 4 at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you've got Equality California filing their own lawsuit against the trans military ban. But there's some good news for the military. West Point has done right by a transgender graduate, Riley Dosh, whose name and correct pronouns were updated by West Point in its alumni records in a sense of inclusion. So this is in the midst of this ban coming about.
Well, in the midst of trans news, in Indiana, there was a bit of good news for people who want to change their birth certificates.
Yeah.
A local judge had ruled that in order to change your birth certificate, you had to publish the new name 3 times in a local newspaper or something like that.
Anybody who changes their name had to do
that. But he was enforcing it against a trans person. And what the Indiana Court of Appeals said was, no, you can't do that. This was a unanimous 3-0 ruling. They said local judges can't independently add extra provisions and add extra hurdles to changing the name. They said as long as you've fulfilled the requirement that the name change is in good faith, and as you said, this applies to trans people and any people who's changing their name, then once that requirement is fulfilled, the name change is okay.
And the plaintiff in this case was saying, you know, having all this be known, having all this be public this way puts me in danger to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of hostility towards transgender people. Although when we talk about the case of Richard Simmons, which we will do now, where is this case
Well,
here?
okay, so Richard Simmons had filed a defamation lawsuit because the National Enquirer and Radar Online had suggested that he was in the process of transitioning.
Yes.
Richard took exception to this, and so what he did was he sued for defamation.
And cited the trans military ban by Trump to show how much hostility that there is.
Well, Judge Gregory Kiosian, and I hope I said his name correctly, was having none of it. And in his ruling, he may have actually helped trans people or advanced the position of trans people as mainstreaming them. Because he basically said, look, well, I'll give you his exact quote. He said, while as a practical matter, the characteristic may be held in contempt by a portion of the population, the court will not validate those prejudices by legally recognizing them.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, we don't want to pretend like everything is rosy and wonderful for trans people, because it's not.
Well, I mean, there was a time when calling someone homosexual was libel.
Right.
It was like in the law. You can't say that about somebody.
Right.
Liberace sued when he was called Liberace sued, and he won in Britain under the libel laws when he was accused of being homosexual. I don't know where they got that jury, but...
As someone who has been to the Liberace Museum before it closed in Palm Springs, in a strip mall in Palm Springs, I can say that's incredible.
But it was considered libelous, and you couldn't say it. And there was so much uptightness in the old days about even writing about it if someone was gay. I mean, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times about the lesbian and gay vote, right, in 1980. It was published in the Times, and I mentioned Ginny Apuzzo, who was the head of the National Gay Task Force, a lesbian, and here's what she said. And the Times said, "How do you know she's a lesbian?" And they had to call her and ask her if the head of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force was a lesbian. Oh, and the better story, I have to be careful how I tell this, is Harvey Milk. When Harvey Milk came to the fore in the late 70s and he was elected, Richard Goldstein of the Village Voice, soon to be defunct as a print paper, but wrote a story about him and this emergence of this gay politician in San Francisco. And the editors got very uptight at the Voice. Well, wait a minute, you're going to say he's homosexual? And they said, how do you know? And Richard said, I'll paraphrase, I screwed him. He had sex with. They'd been lovers when he was in New York. He used a much more colloquial expression for screwing, but we're not supposed to say on the show. But there it is. There it is.
Well, anyway, to bring it back to Richard Simmons, his lawsuit was dismissed, and on grounds that likely is positive for trans people.
Well, yes, it's the first time the question of whether being labeled as transgender is sufficiently harmful to one's reputation to be libelous. So that's progress, folks. I think, because we say that. I did a show with a guy named Eric Brindell on PBS, and Mike Signorilli said something in his column about Eric Brindell sounds gay to me, but this kind of stuff. And oh no, he's on this show, and he said that he sounds gay. And Eric sees me, he says, "Why didn't you defend me against this?" I said, "Well, Eric, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, so I'm."
Well,
anyway.
Shall we go to more good news? How about the lesbian couple who won their settlement?
Go ahead.
All right. So Amanda Abramovich and Samantha Brookover in West Virginia went to get their marriage license because same-sex marriage is legal now in all 50 states. And when they did this in West Virginia, they were confronted by County Clerk, was she actually the Deputy County Clerk, Deputy Clerk in Gilmore County, Debbie Allen.
Not that Debbie Allen, another one.
Who shrieked that they were an abomination and that God would deal with them and caused all kinds of a ruckus screaming in their face. Well,
so another clerk comes in and says, well, that's her religious right to say this. This is where we're going, folks, with this religious freedom stuff. Watch out. This is what they're talking about. But the story has a happy ending.
Surprisingly, the courts disagreed and awarded Ms. Abramovich and Brookover $10,000 in damages for the behavior of Deputy Clerk Debbie Allen and also an apology.
Well,
So,
you know,
good for them.
Brookover's mother called the office and said, "What the heck is going on?" And the county clerk, Jean Butcher, we're going to name these people, said she knew about the interaction, and she believed the couple got what they deserved. The next same-sex couple that sought a marriage license, she said, would get the same or worse.
You know,
now, they give these people the licenses, but they basically whip and humiliate you as they do it.
Now, why can't these things ever happen to me? I can use $10,000. I mean, come on. See, this was my whole thing when they were going to pass the law in the bathrooms that, you know, you would get a reward if you turned into a trans person.
Right.
And I was like, yes, I'm going to get my trans friends. I'm going to send them into the bathroom. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to rat them out. And then we're going to split the take of the reward.
Yes, but wouldn't they have to serve time?
It would get totally thrown out of court on appeal.
But you get your reward.
And we'd split the reward. It was brilliant.
Well, it's a thought. It's a thought.
Anyway,
They were issued an apology. There's no word on disciplining any of these people for what they did.
You know what? Nothing speaks like hemorrhaging money.
Well, you know, it would really hurt if it came out of the pockets of the people who committed the crime, but it ends up coming out of the pockets of the taxpayers. We end up paying for this.
Yeah, but that gives them an incentive to make sure employees toe the line.
Another good story out of Buffalo, New York. Now, New York has LGBT. Well, we have a gay rights law, and the governor has forbidden discrimination against transgender people. But the McKinley High School in the Buffalo City School District wouldn't even allow a gay student union. We're not having that here. So the New York Civil Liberties Union sued them, as they would anywhere in the country, not just in states where you even have these laws, and they won. So now the school has agreed to 2 years of reporting on LGBT discrimination and harassment, training for all staff, but this should be happening anyway.
Okay, but Andy, you're missing the best part of the story.
That's why you're here, Chris.
Amazing LGBT youth in action, specifically the plaintiff, a young man named Bishop Elliott,
yes,
who collected the signatures for the GSA, who wouldn't take no for an answer, who kept at it, who pointed out that, hey, you told us our application came in too late, but another club that applied at the same time, you approved theirs, so what's going on here? And he just would not give up. And this is the great hope for all of us, because no matter what Trump does, no matter what happens in the Supreme Court, we have a generation now that has grown up believing, understanding to the core that they are equal. And they will not put up for a second with any of this nonsense.
How many of us stood up for ourselves in high school?
So
Very
hats
few.
off. Hats off
Very
to Bishop
few.
Elliott.
But again, I want to emphasize, even though, and Buffalo was a city that also had a gay rights law long before even New York City did.
Yeah.
It just happened to have it. But wherever you are, in Mississippi, in in Utah, wherever you are, if you they won't allow you to have a gay student union. You're entitled to have one, and the ACLU or Lambda Legal or one of these groups will defend you, and they will win. Because there is a federal law about clubs that says you've got to accommodate all clubs and you can't discriminate against gays.
I mean, I'm surprised this principal, quite honestly, at McKinley High School still has a job, but, you know.
There you are. What about what happened in Atlanta this weekend?
All right, so now we've brought you the good news. Now we bring you the ugly news. All right, so Atlanta's Black Gay Pride was this past Labor Day Monday, and everyone was having a swell time, apparently, lots of people out. And then all of a sudden, the Atlanta police show up with paddy wagons and order all the gay bars closed, even though they had a permit to be open until 2:30 in the morning. But normal closing time on Mondays is 12:30 in the morning, but that was accepted for Labor Day, long-standing practice in Atlanta. So one has to wonder what was so different about this gathering that caused it to be shut down.
All right. The police are saying it had nothing to do with the gay or the black. It had to do with too many people on the street, and we were worried about things. But some people are saying that only the gay bars were closed, not the other bars. So Kathy Woolard is running for mayor, out lesbian. She said it smacks of discrimination to her. They apologized. They apologized, and they said there was nothing wrong. They said the guy in charge was gay from the police force who was doing this.
See, this is where it gets interesting. So there's a couple of points here. Number one, apparently people were spilling out onto the street because people were having so much fun. There were so many people there. Nothing is more menacing to a largely white police force than a gathering of black men.
Well, it's like what happens on some of the spring break weekends, right? And some of this kind of stuff happens as well. And there's a racist element there.
So, okay, so that's one aspect. Then there is also the aspect that you're correct. There was a gay man in charge of that particular police zone at the time. So that makes it all the more interesting and also raises the fact that maybe it was more about race than it was about being gay, though I'm sure both played a factor. But then the other thing to note is that Atlanta, back in 2009, about this same time actually, in 2009, the police raided the Eagle in Atlanta, the gay bar down there called the Eagle, in one of the most atrocious raids in recent memory, where they threw elderly people down onto the ground and just patrons in the bar.
And it was supposed to lead to a lot of reforms, and I think to some extent it did, but now they've got a problem again. This all took place right near where Mayor, what's his name, Qasim?
Yeah, that's right.
Where the mayor had all the crosswalks painted permanently in rainbows.
Well, many thanks to Gay USA viewer Winston for getting us some of the details on this.
Yes. An encouraging story from Minneapolis, speaking of bars. This is not gay specific, but there's a bar there called the Clubhouse Jaeger Bar, and the employees found out that the owner, a Mr. DeRoma, had donated $500 to the U.S. Senate campaign of Klan leader David Duke down the river in Louisiana. So the entire staff was so appalled, including one who had a Jewish star tattooed behind her ear. They all quit. They said, we cannot work for the profitability of a business like this, even though he was a somewhat absentee owner. It's not like he was the guy on the premises. They said, we can't work for him. We don't care if we don't have our jobs. We're not working here anymore. So they closed the bar.
Good for them for standing on principle, and I hope all those folks find new jobs or already have found new jobs and better jobs.
Right.
Meanwhile, some good news. Let's go back to good news. In sports this season, there's going to be a record-breaking 6 openly gay college football players taking to the field. Specifically, let's give you some names. Scott France in Kansas State, My King Johnson in Arizona, Xavier Colvin at Butler University, I'm going to mangle this, sorry Kyle, Kurdziolek at the University of St. Francis in Illinois, Darian McAllister at Marion University in Indiana, and Wyatt Pertuset at Capital University in Ohio.
It sounds like we are everywhere.
Well, it's funny because they asked My King Johnson, people see you as a pioneer. How do you see yourself? And he said, as a kid who plays football, he's been out for a long time, and he said, being open is not new for me, it's just new for everybody else. And
Very good.
Another reminder that Corey Johnson, who is now a city council member here in New York City and is maneuvering to possibly become the next city council speaker, was an openly gay high school football player.
It was on the front page of the Times, and it was covered by 2020 on ABC. And yes, Corey.
In fact, someone saying that is what launched his political career.
Well, it certainly launched him as an activist, and he got very involved in politics, and there you are. And this was up in New England where he was.
I think so.
Yeah, and I think
we can ask him. Corey, let us know.
Corey's a busy guy these days. He's up for re-election. He doesn't have a primary though. He does not have a primary.
Okay.
And the primary in New York, by the way, for our New York viewers, is Tuesday. There is a Democratic and Republican and primary in New York. Back to college. Let's stay in college for a minute. Wellesley College and Spelman College. These are women's schools, and they are going to join all women's schools in accepting transgender applicants. You like to mention names, so Ninotska Love will be the first openly transgender woman to attend Wellesley, and Spelman's going to do this next year. The other women colleges that accept transgender women are Mills, Smith, Bryn Mawr, and Barnard.
There you go.
Okay.
Hopscotching a bit over to the Supreme Court. It looks like the coming term is shaping up to have several LGBTQ cases. Our legal consultant here on the show, who's been on the show many times, Art Leonard, kind of runs through it.
Yes.
You can run through
What do we have to look forward to?
Well, there is the Kenosha School District in Wisconsin, which has asked the Supreme Court to review a ruling which allowed a transgender high school senior to use the bathroom of that with which he
Sort
or
of
she
like the
identified.
Gavin Grimm case.
Right, and the interesting thing is that they're looking for clarification because a lot of these school districts feel like they're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, and that they get sued if they don't let a trans student use the bathroom with which they identify, but then they get sued if they do by the haters who want to keep the bathrooms traditional. So
I don't like a lot of the things that traditionally go on in bathrooms. That's where kids get beat up.
Oh, that.
Yes.
I thought you were talking about something
Well, there's
else.
that other stuff, yes.
But anyway.
Not in my school.
Anyway,
At least not in high school.
they're hoping for clarity in many of these school districts. So it's likely the Supreme Court will take one of these cases. And the Gavin Grimm case has been resurrected in some form.
They are trying to do that.
So these are some of the cases that are likely to come up on the Supreme Court, along with the
Masterpiece bakers, right?
Exactly. The existing case of the bakery. And there's another case of a florist that's working its way through the system.
And these are the tough ones because, again, we're trying to just uphold the civil rights laws that say you must, if you run a public business, you've got to do business with whoever comes in the door without regard to race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, all those things. That's what the law says. But these bakers and florists want to say, this is my creative expression, my First Amendment right, and I don't want to create something for something I don't support, i.e. a same-sex marriage which goes against my religion. And, the problem is even Anthony Kennedy, when he wrote the marriage decisions, said something about wanting to respect, religious rights and things like that. Now, by that, most of us mean, no, we're not going to make a Catholic church or a mosque or a synagogue do a same-sex wedding if they don't want to do it, or even host one if they don't want to host the ceremony. But these are public businesses. These are public accommodations. And this could undermine the public accommodations laws entirely if people start saying, I have a religious reason for discriminating against you. Because there are religions that teach that the races aren't equal.
Exactly.
And there are
that race mixing is bad. We shouldn't bake a cake for an interracial marriage.
Bob Jones University, cited for that. So this is what we're worried about, and it's very dicey going into this term. We will find out. But the lower courts have upheld the right to be free of discrimination.
Yeah, it's funny. It's after the Hobby Lobby case. It's not the lower courts I'm worried about. It's the Supreme Court.
Yes, right. Well, and if Trump gets another nominee, that's the other problem.
Well, that's why it's actually good that these cases are coming before the court now, because if we do lose another Supreme Court justice who votes our way, we're going to be in big trouble. So better to get these cases decided when we have the best possible chance of a positive decision.
But the country has been so divided, and again, you've got this whole group of religious people who feel acting like they feel persecuted at this point from having to have anything to do with us. Whether it's giving us a marriage license or, selling us a cake.
Change is hard.
All right. Now, and then we read about a horrible incidence of domestic violence in the community where a trans man, Kashmir Nazir Red, 28, in Gates, New York, was fatally stabbed by his partner, Doris Carasquillo, 40. She's been charged with second-degree murder in the death there. So, be aware that this is a problem in the community, and it's a higher problem in the community because we're a more stressed community. So, do what you can. And now, of course, you all know about the Pulse massacre in Orlando. They are now talking about, they're having a big town meeting to decide what kind of a memorial they're going to have. But the bar owner says, I'm going to reopen the bar elsewhere.
So, Andy, is this a sign of resilience, or is it an affront to the memory of what happened?
You know what? I'm going to leave that up to the people of Orlando to decide. And of course, they will decide with their patronage whether they want to go back to a gay bar named The Pulse, and whether that's a sign of rising. Look, I'm the one who, when the World Trade Center came down, I said, just grass it over, and make it a quiet place of contemplation. What did they do? They stuck this enormous tower up there.
Well, and also, I mean, you got to worry a little bit that maybe something called the Pulse might attract, crazies but who knows?
Well, in Brooklyn, this is a custody case. A Hasidic couple, Hasidic Jewish couple. The mother's lesbian, so they got a divorce, but the husband got an agreement. You're still going to raise the kids Orthodox. You're not going to tell them about this lesbianism stuff, all this other kind of stuff. So she agreed to this to get out of the marriage. He married somebody else. He doesn't even show up for the kids for 18 months. So he's not fulfilling his end of the bargain of taking care of the kids. So she goes back to court and says, look, I'm tired of living under all these restrictions. I'm not Hasidic anymore. I want them to be reformed. I want them to meet my partners and everything else. And finally, she got sole custody of the kids and agreement to these things. She still has to keep kosher in the house, according to the settlement.
Keep going, Andy. I have international news.
All right.
Next.
Well, let's talk about some of the people who passed away this week, and we get their pictures up. The Pulitzer Prize-winning poet John Ashbery has died at the age of 90 in the arms of his husband, David Kermani. There he is. He published 28 individual collections of poetry. In 1976, he was the only writer ever to win the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, and the National Book Critics Circle Award in the same year. And Harold Bloom once said of him, no one writing poems in the English language is likelier than Ashbery to survive the severe judgment of time. Mr. Ashbery. In political circles, Rick Stafford, he was only 65. He was the first openly gay chair of a state party, the Minneapolis State Democratic Party. He has died. That was back in 1992. And he was a longtime chair of the DNC's LGBT caucus, played a leading role in getting our issues into the platform and all those kinds of things. He was a guy who worked from the inside. His first convention was back in '72 when he kept his orientation private. But after that, he was out. In Nashville, Rodney Lyle Bragg has died. He was a suicide. He'd been suffering from depression. He was a former pastor of the MCC Church there, went on to work in mental health services.
MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, a gay-oriented church.
Thank you very much. And he was active in organizing the boycott, which we supported, of Cracker Barrel, which used to discriminate against gay employees, the chain of restaurants. This was back in the early 90s, and he was very involved in that. This year, Cracker Barrel was one of the sponsors of Pride in Nashville. That's pretty shocking. He was the first openly gay man to be a foster parent in the state of Tennessee, and later became the first openly gay man permitted to adopt an infant in Tennessee. So a trailblazer, Rod was. And then here in New York, one of the founders of the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays in Queens, Mark Monis, has died at the age of 90. I knew him. He was, he was there from the beginning for his son Glenn, and great. Okay. Let's move on to international news.
Well, unfortunately, more death to report, and this by violent means, and that is the death of Jamaican gay activist Dexter Pottinger. Yes. He was stabbed to death in his home. People heard the screams, but no one reported it. And they found his decomposing body later. Dexter Pottinger was a fashion designer. There's his photo. A style hound, I guess you could say, and he was the face of Pride for Pride Week in 2016, and organized one of the organizers, or helped with JFLAG, the Jamaican Forum of Lesbians, All Sexuals and Gays.
His quote last year, standing up for Pride and JFLAG, was, "I hope that my participation will show members of JFLAG that it's okay to come out in an atmosphere where there is no violence. Realize that it's your time to be part of the change, not just for the week, but permanently." as a part of the community.
Now, a suspect has been arrested. We don't know anything more than that at this time, but at least that's promising that the police are doing something about this case. So, because a lot of times in Jamaica, nothing is done when a gay man is murdered.
Right, right, right. By the time you see the show, you will know more than we do at the moment about what's going on in Australia, because the High Court there heard the case of our challenge to this postal ballot, this non-binding postal ballot on marriage, which the government is trying to force through. So 7 judges are going to rule on the validity of that, and we'll find out what happens. I mean, the campaign is heating up. It's gotten very ugly. Also, the other side has put out those ads again that basically say, you know, they're coming for your children. They want to, you know, recruit your children. They're going to make your children learn about all these homosexual things and all this kind of stuff. And we're just answering with ads that say, no, we're not. Instead of running ads that say, we want to get married, you know, here we are, here's who we are, here's what it's about. I'm a little worried about that.
Well, and also, it's been exposed that at least one of the mothers who made some outrageous claim that, oh, my son will be forced to wear a dress at school, or the principal said that this would happen, was exposed as a liar. Because they talked to the principal, they talked to all the teachers at the school, and they all said, no, that never happened.
Well, you know, we had a guy here in the United States of America who told just one lie after another and still does, and he was elected president of the United States.
You know, this mother may go far. She may be the next PM of Australia. Meanwhile, in the streets of Canberra, there was a huge rally, thousands of people in support of same-sex marriage on the heels of 20,000 people in support of same-sex marriage in Melbourne. So there's a lot of support on the ground in the streets.
And as we told you last week, lots of people registered to vote in order to get these ballots and signed up, and you know, and that's great. But again, if we win the postal vote, that doesn't mean that the parliament is going to pass the marriage bill.
Correct.
So,
but if we lose it, that's not. We have more to lose than to gain through all of this, which is probably one of the main reasons why activists have gone to the Supreme Court, the Australian Supreme Court, to try to block it.
Now, a couple of stories out of Israel. One, the High Court of Justice there, their highest court. They were petitioned by the LGBT association there to recognize same-sex marriage, and they said no. They said it's up to marriage is marriage over there is controlled by the rabbis.
There is no civil marriage in Israel.
And they said if the government wants to change this, it can change this, which is basically what the decision was in New York State in 2005.
Correct.
That delayed same-sex marriage for many years.
Correct.
But on the positive side in Israel, do you have that story?
I don't.
The government reversed its position on same-sex adoption. So they had been opposing it, now they're not, and that's good.
All right, hopscotching over to Bolivia. And I have a couple of Latin American stories, but in Bolivia, the older population of quote-unquote diverse sexual orientation and gender identity held its first meeting, a big meeting to try to get their issues on the agenda and get an action plan going. So hats off to Bolivia for dealing not only just with the LGBTQ issues, but with an eye towards seniors who are very often neglected in the community.
The Supreme Court in India is likely to hear the pleas against the ban on gay sex on September 8th, as we sit here tomorrow.
And I'm going to jump back to Latin America, where we have a bunch of stories from Mexico, where a new code of conduct for the Ministry of Health, or issued by the Ministry of Health, is being enacted and used in all the health centers across the country to try to end discrimination and stigma against LGBTQ people.
That is great.
And then continuing the patchwork of marriage efforts in Mexico, there's been a bill introduced in Sonora State. There is an effort in Puebla State to get same-sex marriage legal, but the legislators don't want to take their law off the books against it. Meanwhile, activists have been complaining to the Human Rights Commission in the state of Chiapas And the reason why this is also patchwork in Mexico is because their situation is a little bit strange. In Mexico, same-sex marriage is legal, has to be recognized across the country. But there's only some states that have legalized it. In those other states, which haven't officially legalized it, you've got to actually petition individually to the court to have a special dispensation, in order to get married. So gradually this is changing. Gradually more and more states are enacting laws that will legalize same-sex
We
marriage.
had kind of a patchwork in this country for a long time as well.
So we are no strangers to this process.
No, but I wish they'd get it over with because the Supreme Court always seems to uphold the right to do it. So, you know.
Meanwhile, some transgender people were able to get the birth certificates they deserve in Mexico. 18 trans women in Mexico's Guerrero state have gotten new birth certificates. And
in Malta, they've introduced an X gender marker in official documents there.
Malta is like on the cutting edge here.
They're getting over their conservative Catholicism, more about which later.
Well, it's fascinating to me how Catholic countries seem to be the first ones to legalize same-sex marriage.
Well, you know, I mean, a lot of it has to do with education levels. I mean, in terms of who comes along, you know, first on this. That's why Scandinavia, I think, was the leader. I think you could probably correlate it with the test scores kids get in first grade or something.
Well, Malta, if you may remember, is recently legalized same-sex marriage by a nearly unanimous vote. Only one person voted against it in the Maltese parliament. So they are really doing wonderful things, and I hear it's a very pretty, beautiful place, so I may have to go there.
Now, I just said something nice about Scandinavia, but I'm going to have to take some of it back because Finland has kept the trans sterilization requirement. They require that trans people undergo sterilization before legally changing their gender.
That's just bizarre. That's like you've got to mutilate your reproductive organs.
It's like a misunderstanding of what's going on, and it's not good. On the other hand, Finland, you know, their submission to the Academy Awards from the film from Finland this year is the movie Tom of Finland, a big gay movie about the life of Tukko Laaksonen, who created those gay icons, those big Tom of Finland figures with the large areas, yes. That's their submission to the Academy Awards this year.
See, now I was saving that for entertainment news, but before we go to that, we do have some news about gay issues from places you wouldn't necessarily imagine.
What do you got?
Well, in Mongolia.
Yes.
They just kicked off their Pride Week, and they had, for them, a huge parade.
We got a picture of it, if they can put it up.
Yeah, so that's good news. A lot of people participated. And then also in Mongolia, well, we're waiting for
there we go. The Mongolians.
Yeah, exactly.
Marching for Pride.
And also expats and supporters who are not Mongolian who were there.
All right.
And then also in Mongolia, related, because the Mongolian LGBT Center has been very active in getting this parade organized. They've been lobbying the Mongolian parliament and have actually made some progress in getting police officers trained for an anti-discrimination effort. So the initiative is going to train 100 police officers from across Mongolia in a project they're calling a tolerant and hate-free Mongolia.
Yeah,
so good for them.
That's, you know, long before we had gay rights in New York, we had a lot of meetings with the police because to end police harassment, we would meet with them in small groups and try to train them. Now the training is done at the academy, but it's good.
Meanwhile, while we're on the Central Asian steppes, Kyrgyzstan Ministry of Health has approved a manual for transgender health. So, you know, I mean, Kyrgyzstan, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
For crying out loud.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we are being marginalized in Jordan. They're doing a real crackdown there, crackdown on the LGBT publication over there. So it's becoming a tough atmosphere there in Jordan.
And in Samoa, unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's going to be any movement there while the current prime minister is in power.
Oh boy!
Because he has ruled out not just same-sex marriage, but any change to their abortion laws. So, you know, they're maybe a little bit behind the progressive times in Samoa, or at least this prime minister is.
Speaking of Catholics, Monaco is looking at civil unions, and then there's the Pope. He gave a series of interviews which are being put out in a new book. The headlines have been about the fact that he went to a woman Jewish psychiatrist when he was 42 years old, when he was having trouble coping with being the head of the Jesuits down there. during the the military junta. That was news. But he also came out for civil unions. Now, it's really not the first time he's done that. When he was the Archbishop in Argentina, they were going for marriage. He said that would be the work of the devil. He said, how about civil unions?
Yeah.
And they said, no, we're doing the marriage thing.
Well, it seems to be his fallback position, to sort of as a backstop against marriage.
I don't know too many bishops who ever came out for any gay relationship laws over the years, and he might be nice if he would tell Catholic institutions to respect our relationships and not fire us when we get married, Anyway.
Good luck with that.
And then the Chechnya situation, the news this week, a couple of things. David France, the filmmaker who just made a film about Marsha P. Johnson, the famous transgender leader, is over there now filming, and will be back soon.
Filming specifically about the oppression of gay men over there.
Right, and there was a protest at the, you know how the Russian consulate in, this is the protest in San Francisco. That's Michael Petrelis holding up the sign that says, Russia, stop killing gay Chechens. They were having that, they were closing down the Russian consulate there, right, because we're retaliating, right. And the smoke was coming out, they're burning everything. So Michael always knows to show up whenever there's something going on in a place like that.
There's fire. Yes. That's the place to show up.
Make your point with the press. And it seems that Canada is quietly helping a lot of refugees from Chechnya. They're trying to do it quietly because if this gets exposed, people get killed and all these other kinds of things.
So why are we talking about it?
Well, no. We're not talking about who, but they're running an underground railroad for these people. But a Russian official warned that if Canada violated Russian law by bringing homosexual Chechens to Canada as refugees, there will be consequences.
Oh, Lord.
Oh my God. All right, I think that's it for international news.
AIDS news. You had news about this woman I've never heard of, self-help guru Louise Hay.
Louise Hay was a very big. She's one of these self-help gurus. Basically, you love yourself. She's 90 years old. She just passed away. If you love yourself, you cure yourself, and all this kind of stuff. And people were desperate in the she was mainly based in, I believe, in Los Angeles. People were desperate, and she attracted hundreds of people with AIDS to come to these things who were, they felt like they had no hope. She was telling them things like you can cure yourself with just self-love, which is a lie. Yes, you should love yourself, and that will help you take care of yourself. But as Bill Ballman, our associate producer, said, she basically was, murdering people by telling them that this is what was going to cure them when it wasn't. So anyway, she was a very, very controversial figure, but she had quite a following at one time there in West Hollywood. All right. And there's a new study that says that giving Truvada to teenage gay and bisexual adolescent boys is effective. It's not approved for use by teenagers, for underage teenagers, but this study that was done finds that it is, and they hope that the FDA will go along with that. Okay, entertainment news.
Well, Reese Witherspoon is going to produce a film about the Westboro Baptist Church. Now, that's the church, you may recall, that shows up all over the place in very inappropriate places, usually funerals of people often who have nothing to do with LGBT issues, and holds up God hates fag sign and burn in hell signs.
I haven't seen them as much lately. I'm wondering what's going on. But anyway.
Well, anyway, Reese Witherspoon has decided to make a film titled This Above All, which will focus on the life of actually one of the granddaughters of Westboro Baptist Church founder, Fred Phelps, who came out of that lifestyle, if I may borrow that phrase, and abandoned that church and was cut off by the family.
She was excommunicated.
Yeah, and so
from the family.
It's going to focus on her life and on their early life and background. And how the church
Nick
got
Hornby,
started.
a great screenwriter, is writing this. He says it says so much about so many things in contemporary America.
There you go. So look out for that. It's just getting started, so it'll be a while before it hits theaters.
Hey, congratulations to Ellen. I didn't realize she'd been doing this talk show for 15 years now. You're catching up with us, Ellen. We've been doing this for 32 years.
It makes me feel really old because I remember when she was doing the Ellen show. Was that what it was?
Sure.
No, it was called Ellen.
Ellen, yeah.
And she did the whole coming out thing when I was speaking into the microphone, I'm gay, and it was a huge thing. And now she's been on TV doing her talk show for 15 years.
Now, you are our sacrificial moviegoer. That is your unofficial title.
I am. But I have not bled lately.
You can read Chris's movie reviews at cfcooper.net, cfcooper.net, all of your movie reviews. But we're talking about a movie we haven't seen at this point called Beach Rats, which has gotten a lot of critical acclaim, but it's also now caused a lot of controversy.
And it's baffling to me why there's a picture, I guess that's the promotional still from the film. And
it's about these kids in South Brooklyn, in a not so great neighborhood, not the hip part of Brooklyn.
Basically 4 kids who end up tricking a gay man into meeting one of them so that they can rob him, and end up beating him. In the film, you don't know what his fate ultimately is.
Well, in real life.
Well, and that's the controversy, is because it is clearly based on actual events that occurred in Brooklyn. And
of the Michael Sandy case. Michael Sandy was murdered by these kids. And they don't show that in the film, although they even shoot it in some of the places where Michael Sandy was assaulted.
And the source of the controversy is why the writer-director, Eliza Hittman, won't fess up to using this as her source. Is there some legal reason why she doesn't want to talk about this? Is she afraid she'll get sued or that she doesn't own the rights to the story? But for whatever the reason, she's not willing to talk about the fact that she based it on this, even though it's blatantly obvious. So that's the controversy.
Well, Clarence Patton, who was at the Anti-Violence Project at the time of this case, keeps posting on her Wikipedia entry for Beach Rats his complaints about this, and they keep getting removed.
There you go. Well, go read the Gay City News. Duncan Osborne has done a good wrap-up of all the issues.
You think you're going to see the film?
I probably will.
All right,
I probably will. In which case, I'll let you guys know.
Because Chris is going to be back with us next week.
I have to bleed for the viewers. It is my role as the sacrificial moviegoer.
You're doing a great job. Just a couple of Broadway notes. A Doll's House Part 2, which we're very fond of, is going to play its final performance on September the 24th. Julie White and Stephen McKinley Henderson are now in it with Jane Howdy-Shell. And Bernadette Peters, this is very gay, is taking over for Bette Midler in Hello, Dolly on January 20th. And the out-gay actor Victor Garber is taking over from the out-gay actor David Hyde Pierce as Horace Vandergelder.
There you go.
Yeah.
So we have exactly 1 minute. Who's your pick for the next president of the United States?
You have 1 minute to tell us who's going to be the next president of the United States.
I asked you first.
I keep saying, and maybe we can talk more about this next week. Okay. I keep saying the person who's going to be the Democratic nominee and who could beat Trump or Pence is going to be somebody we're not talking about now. Okay. It's going to be an outsider, the way Obama came up. It's going to be a fresh face because the Democratic brand, the Republican brand are spoiled in this country. For it happened. People have left are leaving the parties. They don't trust institutions. So we're going to need some kind of an outsider, I think. So that's why, even though I like people like Joe Biden and I like Julian Castro and a lot of these other people, Martin O'Malley, that they talk about, that they're insiders.
In the final 10 seconds.
Some of them are too old.
I will say I think it's going to be Kamala Harris, either as VP or presidential candidate.
You heard it here first, folks.
And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for being with us, Chris, and we'll see you. Yes, we'll both be back next week.